So there's this story in the Gospel of John, the 11th chapter. It's a story, it's about sickness, it's about death, and it's about life. And here on Easter Sunday, rather than talking about the crucifixion and the resurrection, things that we want to celebrate on Easter, they're impactful, they're huge, they changed the world. I want to look at a story that involves a resurrection, even though it doesn't involve the ultimate resurrection. There's a guy named Lazarus, and he's a close friend of Jesus, and he's got two sisters named Mary and Martha, and they're very concerned for Lazarus. He's currently on his deathbed. And so Mary and Martha, they send messengers to let Jesus know, hey, your friend, our brother, is dying. Can you please come? Can you help him? Jesus receives this message. We know that he did, and then he does nothing about it for 2 days. And after 2 days, he goes to his disciples and he says, hey guys, Lazarus has fallen asleep. We need to go and wake him up. And his disciples, gotta love them. Everybody in the Gospel of John, man, they don't understand what Jesus is saying. And his disciples say to him, they're like, Jesus, if Lazarus is sleeping and he's sick, we probably ought to let him sleep. You know, he probably needs to get some rest. And Jesus is like, guys, Lazarus is dead. We're going to go and we're going to resurrect him. And they're like, cool. So the last time we were in Judea, Jesus, folks tried to kill you. Are you sure that this is a good idea? And he says something in the passage, it's a little cryptic, but for our purposes, to summarize kind of what he says to the disciples is, I'm not worried about that. I got stuff to do. And so Jesus apparently goes outside. Didymus or Thomas, doubting Thomas, has like this moment of inspiration. He's talking to the other disciples and he says, hey, let's go with Jesus. And if he stopped right there, his name would have had to be something different. But Thomas goes, let's go with Jesus so that we can die too. You know, like for a moment, you're like, Thomas, you've got faith. But apparently this was something that it didn't just occur one time. He had some doubts, as did everyone following Jesus. But they do. They go and they follow Jesus, planning to die with him, thinking that he doesn't know what he's doing. He's going to go and get himself killed. So he's outside of the town, and Martha comes to meet him. And Martha says to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, if you ask God for anything, he'll give it to you. And Jesus says to her, after some other question, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will not die, but they will live. And anyone who lives will never die. Do you believe this? And she says, yeah, I believe this. So she goes back. Apparently, Jesus told her to go and get her sister Mary. So she goes back, she gets her sister Mary, and Mary's in a room with a crowd of people that are all mourning Lazarus' death, and she very quickly, hearing that Jesus wanted to talk to her, she gets up and she exits, and the people that are there are thinking, oh, she must be going to visit Lazarus, let's go with her. So they get up and they follow her, and I guess she went in the direction of Lazarus' tomb towards Jesus, but she gets to Jesus. First words out of her mouth, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And so Jesus sees her extremely sad. He sees this group around her that's all mourning his friend's death. And he says, take me to the tomb. And it says that he was powerfully, emotively moved. And as they're on their way, you got a picture, I guess they're all walking, they're wailing, they're crying, they're sad. Jesus is overwhelmed and he weeps. It says Jesus wept. Traditionally, it is taught. If you go to seminary, you're evangelical, especially if there's any ties to fundamentalism, you read a systematic theology, it is taught that God is immutable and he's impassible. This means that God is not changing and that his emotions don't change. Our actions have no impact on God's emotions. And this is what is typically taught, immutability, impassibility, because if God is perfect, then he cannot change. Because if perfection changes, it changes from perfection to imperfection. The ideal, it cannot change, because as soon as it changes, where can it go from perfect? It becomes less perfect. But I want to suggest to you that rather than letting Greek philosophy and logic influence our thinking, we want to let the Bible influence our thinking. And biblically speaking, God experiences a whole range of emotions, but he experiences them perfectly. When God is angry, he is perfectly angry. When God is happy, he is perfectly happy. When God is loving you, he's loving you perfectly. And when God is sad, when Jesus is weeping with this group of people, he is doing it perfectly. And he is feeling broken. Even though he knows the plan, he knows what is coming. He is broken and he's overwhelmed because the people that he loves around him are broken and overwhelmed. God experiences emotions like we do. We're made in his image, but he experiences them perfectly. So Jesus weeping with this group, they get to the tomb. There's a stone in front of the tomb, and Jesus looks at it and he says, hey guys, get rid of the stone. Get the stone out of the way. And somebody goes, psst, hey Jesus, what? We probably don't want to do that. It stinks. Like he's been in there for a few days. It probably smells awful. I don't think that's a good idea. And Jesus, I'm summarizing, but he's basically like, you don't even know what's about to happen. Like it's about to get real, okay? Move the stone. So they move the stone. And Jesus says out loud for everyone to hear, he explicitly says, like, this prayer is so funny. He's like, God, I know that you hear me, and I'm grateful for it. And I'm saying this out loud because I want the people around me to know that you hear me. And I want them to know that our relationship is unique. This is essentially what he's communicating to the group around him. And then he says, Lazarus, come out. And so it says, the scriptures say that Lazarus came out of the grave in his grave clothes, like in the embalming, everything. And so Jesus looks at him, he says, hey, get those grave clothes off of him and let him go. And the idea is like, hey, get that stuff off of him and give him some space, guys. Like, people are freaking out. And the miracle spread around so much that the religious leadership got really scared, and that's when they really got serious about plotting to kill Jesus. In fact, the high priest at the time, Caiaphas, made this prediction, not even knowing that he was doing it, made this prediction about Jesus dying for the sake of others and for the sake of the world. Read John 11. But thinking about Easter, thinking about resurrection, that Jesus can just call this guy out, I want to go back to the verse that is, or the phrase that is repeated twice in this chapter. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, from Martha first. And then Mary shows up, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Easter Sunday, what you got to understand, believer, is in order to have resurrection, you have to have death. Death is necessary for resurrection. And so when we're thinking about Easter, I just got, in your life, what are you holding on to? What is drawing you away from God? What needs to die so that God can resurrect it? Your anxiety about your singleness, your anxiety about your marriage, your career, your job, your dreams, your ambitions, all the stuff you want to accomplish. Jesus told us to die daily. Before Jesus got to the cross, before Jesus was executed, Jesus died to himself just by becoming a human, giving up heaven and all of this, and he calls us to do that. He calls us to die to ourselves daily, not just because it's a good idea, not just to be obedient, because death is a prerequisite for resurrection. Death is required for resurrection power. Believer, Easter time, we celebrate Jesus' resurrection, an example of what will happen to us. We will physically die. We will physically be resurrected as a result of our faith and as a result of his power. But today, as we celebrate Easter this year, one way that you can do that daily, what needs to die in my life for God's resurrection power to get in there? What needs to die so that God can resurrect it? Hey guys, thanks for spending a few minutes with me on Easter. I hold it dearly. I really hope that you got something out of that. My prayer is that whatever God wanted you to hear is what you heard. And if you would allow me, I'd love to say a prayer for you right now before we go our separate ways for a week. Please bow your heads. Father, thank you for today and this opportunity. Thank you for your word and the way it encourages us. Thank you that you brought a man back to life before you even brought yourself back to life. Nobody in the history of the world has ever laid down their own life and picked it back up by their own authority and by their own power. You are just amazing. You're unbelievable. And we are so grateful for the example that you set and the fact that we can look forward to you giving us, using that power and that authority to bring us back to life, to let us reign in heaven with you. And whatever that means, we're so excited to celebrate Easter, and just thank you for all that you do. Amen.